Over 2 exhausting days, a guy imprisoned and committed horrifying acts against his own niece, an overseas student. Years passed, and the entire scope of his activities remained unclear and hidden until a strange USB drive appeared mysteriously a few years later. What was this forbidden craving? And what would make a man lust over his niece? Well, there's more to this unsolved mystery. Let's take a deep journey through this case of the murderer's unholy desire for his daughter and niece. Distance between parents and their child. When a child studies abroad, one of the scariest worries a parent may have is that something will obviously happen to them. Nonetheless, the parents' concerns would typically be lessened if they could live with relatives abroad. However, sometimes it shouldn't. This is the tale of Meng-Mei Lang, a brilliant Chinese university student who specializes in business administration and finance. Lang lived alone with Chenggu, her mother. In 2008, her father passed suddenly, leaving the two of them alone. But Lang had always desired to study overseas, with a particular focus on Sydney-based universities. Her mother made the decision to encourage her travel since she was aware of her longing to visit that place. A few years prior, in 2012, Lang's aunt had actually tied the knot with an Australian guy called Derek Barret, who was in his mid-20s. Before Derek worked in IT, he lost his job and eventually remained jobless. The majority of the labor was done by Lang's aunt, who was at least 10 years older than him and frequently traveled to Wallen on business. Lang's mother wasn't against her moving to Australia to study as long as she lived with them, because she now had family there. She therefore seized the chance, took off, and moved in with her aunt, cousin, and uncle in the campy neighborhood of southwest Sydney in 2011. While Lang was living in Australia, she adopted the name Michelle and started to become a bit of an explorer. She shared photos of herself on social media from a variety of locations, including Warrie Beach on the south coast, Resolute Beach in Chase National Park, and West Head Lookout in Sydney Harbour. She frequently went out with her pals, sharing photos of them socializing and enjoying cocktails on Instagram like any other college student. As far as she was aware, for a few years, everything appeared to be very normal. Meanwhile, Derek Barret seemed like a regular, plump little boy to those around him. Although he appeared cautious and clumsy when using computers, he never truly came across as antisocial or malevolent. But wait, could it be that Derek is obsessed with computers? He was about as unremarkable as it got for those around him. Nobody realized that he was a potential sexual offender behind the scenes. In addition to Lang, Derek had been fascinated by her cousin and his own stepdaughter. After a few years of cohabitation, he let his imagination rule his actions and took an increasingly sinister turn. He installed a camera in the bathroom at some point, concealing it beneath some toiletries. He prepared the bath for Lang and invited her to come in and unwind as a test. When she did, he captured the entire event on camera. He didn't stop at this one time, however. He kept filming her while she took multiple showers and changed clothing. In the same way, he even began to film his stepdaughter. As Lang and his stepdaughter slept, he started installing cameras in their rooms. As he stood over their beds and enjoyed himself, he would record them dozing off. Derek was not even satisfied with getting this far, even though he took a ton of these recordings, which may be anything from 30 seconds to several minutes long. How the crime started. Michelle Lang went shopping on a typical Thursday, April 21st, 2016, at the Sydney seafood markets in the inner city of Darlinghurst. She eventually boarded a train to return to Campy. Her pals reported seeing her right before a long weekend began at a bus station close to UTS. They had assumed that perhaps she was going on a date because she had been corresponding with them on social media. But however, all of her postings and communications abruptly stopped. She was usually in contact with her friends and family, always letting them know where she was going, so this was really out of character for her. Those in her immediate vicinity became extremely cautious after she abruptly stopped communicating. Derek was left alone at home by Lang's aunt, Derek's wife, who was once again away at work because her cousin was also away. Derek made the decision to escalate his creepiness to an unimaginable new level now that he was by himself. Like he had done before, Derek placed a few cameras around Lang's bed early the following morning, but this time was very different. He set up several cameras, each from a different viewpoint, instead of just one. He led Lang inside the room on camera. She asked him what was happening, confused, but he overwhelmed her in an instant, covering her mouth with duct tape and binding her to the bed. After stripping her naked, he used his phone to snap more than 20 photos of her from various viewpoints and distances, including close-ups of her horrified face. Not willing to leave her alone, he proceeded to repeatedly thrust himself upon her as the cameras continued to roll. All of the abuse, struggle for her life, and final shouts of agony as she started to bleed from several places were caught on tape. She was chained so tightly at one point that her limbs and legs swelled and turned purple. Derek fixed the tape quietly and returned to his work, asking, "Now where were we?" Rewinding the camera. He recorded this behavior for 13 minutes until the primary camera toppled over, but the video didn't end there. Lang shouted at Derek, calling him crazy and telling him he couldn't do this to her, all as the camera recorded the sounds. All the while, she was immobile and totally restrained. Derek had meticulously prepared everything and videotaped it all for later viewing. He stored the camera's footage on a USB drive for later viewing, but he saved the photo he snapped on his phone for convenience. This attack cycle may have lasted for 2 days at least. When Derek's stepdaughter returned home over these 2 days, she had no idea that her cousin had been bound and gagged in her upstairs bedroom the entire time. She had even been sleeping in a room directly beneath her. Do you find this video interesting? Subscribe to Unsolved Files if you want to see more amazing content like this. And don't forget to give this video a like. It will really help us grow. The brutal killing of Lang. Derek returned to Lang's bedroom at some point over these 2 days when her stepdaughter was still at home, snapped one more picture of her, and proceeded to stab her almost 30 times, ending with a final blow to the throat. How come after defiling her, why would Derek kill her? That is truly demonic. After that, Derek covered her corpse with plastic wrap, loaded her into his vehicle, and drove off. After getting captured on camera at a convenience shop, he made a pit stop along the road to purchase some refreshments. Finally, he arrived to Snapper Point on the central coast of New South Wales. He flung her body into what is known as a blowhole, a cliff face opening that leads to a sea cave that is driven open by the force of the water. After snapping a few shots of the view, Derek got back in his car. Before heading back home, he made a brief stopover at his parents' house. Barely a day had passed when a tourist in the vicinity discovered Lang's body wrapped in plastic. The police were called by this traveler, and they came to retrieve the body. But for the moment, they had no way of identifying her because she was entirely nude. In the interim, they made public a computer-generated picture of her face in the hopes that people might be able to recognize her. The investigation. Derek's wife returned home from her vacation to Wollongong the following day. She was rather worried because her niece had stopped using social media and communicating with others, in addition to being absent from the house. She was eager to go and file a missing persons report. She went to the Campy police station with Derek to report her missing. They also gave a picture of Lang that matched the computer-generated image of the girl who had gone missing the day before. For a DNA study, they were also able to supply a toothbrush and a few hairs from her comb. Lang's body was identified, and it was established that she had passed away. The news broke to Lang's mother back in China, who was devastated. The mother arrived on the scene as quickly as she could, traveling from China with a few relatives. The authorities kept searching for traffic and local CCTV footage to piece together Lang's last moments. They kept interviewing her friends, relatives, and associates. But as they did this, Derek said that Lang had departed on Friday, joining a man she had met online for a date, a man whose photos he claimed to have golden hair. Nevertheless, a car that resembled Derek's car was seen approaching the national park, where her body was discovered the day before, according to CCTV evidence. With this evidence, Derek was thought to be the last person to see her, having told them that he had seen her the previous evening at supper. When the police questioned him, Derek curiously declined to discuss his relationship with Lang on an intimate level. They were almost certain they had their suspect. Upon retrieving his phone, they examined his GPS data and discovered that he had been in the same location as her body had been reported on his phone. Additionally, videos showing Derek standing over Lang's and his stepdaughter's beds were discovered, providing more proof of his sick infatuation. Furthermore, as they were looking through his phone, they discovered the horrifying pictures he had taken of Lang, bound and terrified. They had these photos, but not the video that he had uploaded to the USB drive. They were unaware of the full, brutal depth of his killing, even though it was evident that he had bound her up. Derek desperately attempted, but was unable, to remove the evidence from his phone, knowing that his time was running out. The 31-year-old Derek was charged with several offenses, including murder and wrongful imprisonment. Bail was refused, and he was left to await his destiny. Derek hired Bill Whitby as his attorney, and Whitby informed the Burwood local court that Derek would be entering a not guilty plea, citing his own deep grief over the loss. Derek never requested bail, but he persisted in acting impassively when he was filmed testifying in court. Derek faced numerous more charges following a more extensive check of his cell phone. Different charges leveled against Derek. These included 2 incidents of placing a device to film or detain for advantage, 5 instances of active indecency, 17 cases of filming someone's private parts without permission, and 2 counts of filming someone in a private act without permission. In connection with the films, Derek would later confess to 7 charges of indecency and aggravated sexual assault. Derek went to see a doctor, telling him he let his personal issues seep into the family home and that he lost everything as a result of a foolish weekend. No words can begin to convey the emotional suffering he caused Lang's mother and the family. Derek penned a letter addressed to the court, but it seemed to be more directed at Lang's mother. He stated, "Because of your loss, I can only imagine what it must be like for you to experience every moment of your life." He continued by saying that he wished he could turn back the hands of time and erase the day that had brought him so much suffering. He still gets nightmares and can't sleep at night because of it. But how can he be sorry after he murdered a young girl in cold blood? The aftermath. Derek attempted to pin the entire thing on drugs and a rough upbringing. He even claimed to have amnesia about the whole situation at one point. He claimed that the only thing he remembered was arguing with Lang, waking up, and standing over a bloody sink. But nobody really believed him, considering how long it took to organize and clear all this. He declared that he never harbored malice against anyone, adding that the only thing he could do, in a little way, was dedicate the rest of his life to trying to atone for his actions. After everything was taken into account, Derek was finally convicted of his crimes in 2017 and received a very moderate sentence of 34 years and 6 months. The court was unaware of the full extent of what had actually occurred, or that it might have lasted for 2 whole days, because they had only seen the pictures on his phone. He was able to get off considerably easier than he otherwise should have because of this. This is where you might believe the narrative stops, right? But it doesn't. This is the real turning point in the story, as it goes from horrifying to weird and back again. Now let's pay close attention because Derek's statement is not complete. The unholy desire revealed. 2 years after the sentencing, in November 2019, a woman showed up to visit her ailing mother, who suffers from dementia, at her Strathfield residence. She saw that her mother had a tiny USB disk in her hand. She put it on a computer, curious to see what it would contain, not knowing that she would find something similar. She was appalled to witness a man continually forcing himself on a girl who was chained and blindfolded. She called the cops right away. The 9 videos on the USB were deemed horrifying by the investigators. An hour or so was dedicated to compiling every film that Derek had taken during the 2 days. It began when he entered the bedroom and continued until the camera toppled, but it also included a few additional recordings he had taken during the entire captivity. After this fresh information regarding the attack surfaced, Derek, who was already incarcerated, was scheduled to appear in court to continue his sentence. When a psychiatrist checked on him to evaluate his mental state once more, they discovered nothing unusual was wrong with him. When they discussed the murder, Derek's perspective shifted, even though he continued to insist that he was suffering from amnesia and couldn't recall anything. The psychiatrist didn't believe it, stating that his actions following the murder didn't indicate that he didn't remember the attack. He added that if someone had genuinely forgotten what had happened and then came in contact with the dead body, they would typically call the police, an ambulance, or attempt to assist the person. In his testimony, the physician stated that, in addition to voyeurism, he believed Derek to have either schizoid personality disorder or autism spectrum disorder. Once more, Lang's mother asked the judge to increase Derek's sentence to life in prison. She explained to the judge that her family had suffered greatly since Lang's death in April 2016, and that she was a single mother, attempting to support her daughter through an international student in Sydney. Soon after learning of Lang's passing, her mother, who was Lang's grandmother, as healthy as she was, died of grief. Another hearing for Derek. Derek then had to appear at a fresh hearing, armed with all the evidence contained on the USB device. The doctor observed that Derek persisted in downplaying his conduct and blaming drugs, despite the fact that the fresh data demonstrated that Derek thoroughly enjoyed what he was doing during the horrible act. To make matters worse, Derek was even on tape claiming that this was just one terrible episode, and that he wasn't some kind of maniac. He even claimed to have had consensual intercourse with his niece. Derek's earliest probable release and the earliest parole he may receive were both pushed back to 2052 by the NSW Supreme Court, where he was sentenced to 20 more years without the possibility of parole for at least 12 years. These heinous crimes can only be legitimately considered some of the most severe instances of such acts that the courts have encountered or are likely to witness. According to Justice Helen Wilson, Miss Lang suffered great personal defilement from an attacker who enjoyed causing her pain, humiliation, and degradation. The perpetrator treated Miss Lang with the most heinous and harmful disrespect, manipulating her body as if she were a useless, inanimate object. According to her, a life sentence would have been given if the entire scope of the offense had been revealed in 2017. How Derek's USB drive ended up in the hands of the elderly woman in Strathfield is still a mystery. She lived 6 kilometers away from the former Barret residence, had no relation to the Barret family, had never ventured outside her front yard, and it had been several years since the murder. This part of the case, according to the authorities, is a riddle that will never be solved. It could be magical or just God trying to deal with Derek for his evil act, or maybe it could be karma. Who knows? Do you want to know how a mom was froze to death? Check out this next video. Go watch it now.